What if I told you that some battles are fought within the mind, and you only realize it too late? There are stories that withstand time, told around campfires and passed down from generation to generation. But some of these stories refuse to disappear. This is one of them, an ancient curse originating from the depths of an ancestral forest where scarlet eyes watch, waiting for the next fool to dare cross its boundaries. You might think this is just a fable, but what if I told you this story is more real than you think? This tale comes from an ancient Japanese legend, written around the 18th century, preserved in old scrolls, and never forgotten. Before we continue, remember that your support is crucial to keeping these stories alive. Like the video and subscribe to the channel, because some legends only remain in the shadows as long as we keep them alive. I should have listened to the elders. They always said the Forbidden Forest was a place where even the wind was too scared to blow. But that night, the need to get home quickly was louder than any superstition. With the full moon faintly lighting the path, I crossed the old stone gateway marking the entrance to that cursed land. At first, everything seemed normal, until the silence became heavy, suffocating. Not even the crickets dared to sing. A shiver ran down my spine when I felt something watching me. I quickly turned, but saw nothing but the twisted trees and endless darkness. I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. A fatal mistake. Then I saw it. Those scarlet eyes glowing in the dim light, intense and relentless. I could barely breathe. They didn't blink, didn't move. Just stared at me like they already knew everything that was about to happen. My heart raced, and before I could run, the darkness around me took shape. A monstrous figure made of hatred and vengeance emerged from the shadows. In that moment, my fate was sealed. I was frozen. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, but my legs felt glued to the ground as if the earth itself had condemned me. Those scarlet eyes burned like live embers, fixed on me with an ancient hunger. Then he stepped out of the shadows. The Oni. His reddish skin reflected an evil glow in the moonlight, and his sharp teeth glistened like blades. At first, he didn't say anything. He just watched me, like a predator savoring the fear of its prey before the attack. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded like rocks breaking apart. You dared to cross the line, and now you belong to me. His words were like invisible claws, tearing apart any hope I might have had. I tried to scream, but my voice died before it even reached my lips. Before I could react, I felt an unbearable heat burning my forehead. A sharp pain pierced through me, as if a mark was being carved into my flesh. The smell of burnt skin filled my nose, and I fell to my knees, defeated before I even understood what was happening. The last thing I saw before I passed out were those eyes, always watching me. When I woke up, the first thing I felt was the burning pain on my forehead. My skin still throbbed as if it were on fire. The sky was gray, signaling the dawn, and I was lying by the edge of a stream deep in the forest. My memories were hazy fragments. The glow of those scarlet eyes was the only thing clear in my mind. With difficulty, I got up and followed the river until I recognized the boundaries of my village. The place I once called home seemed different, colder, more distant. People stopped what they were doing when they saw me. Their faces were a mix of astonishment and fear. Whispers quickly spread, and I only realized why when I saw my reflection in the water. My eyes were as red as blood. I tried to explain what had happened, but no one believed me. Talking about the Oni only increased their distrust. The word cursed was whispered like a death sentence. I didn't know what that mark meant, but something inside me told me this was just the beginning, and that the true darkness was still to come. I was being hunted. The first night back in the village was hell. My eyes burned as if they were still burning under the Oni's cursed touch. Exhausted and feverish, I collapsed onto the bed, hoping for the relief of sleep. But rest never came. I was dragged into a nightmare so real it felt like I was trapped in another world. I was back in the forest, but this time everything was distorted. The trees had twisted shapes, like hands trying to grab me. The ground was covered with thick red fog, smelling of fresh blood. And then I saw it. Those scarlet eyes, glowing intensely in the darkness, fixed on me. They weren't just watching. They were waiting. I ran as fast as I could, but it was useless. Each step seemed to sink me deeper into that monstrous reality. I could hear its breath behind me, heavy and threatening. When I turned, the Oni was there, closer than ever, its presence filling every space around me. I woke up screaming, my heart pounding like an out-of-control drum. But something inside me told me I still wasn't truly awake. The next morning, I woke up with a tight chest and the bitter taste of the nightmare still stuck in my throat. A strange silence hung over the house. I called for my wife, but there was no answer. The sun barely filtered through the cracks in the window, making the atmosphere even more suffocating. A cold premonition took hold of me as I crossed the empty hallway. When I reached the bedroom, the world seemed to stop. She was lying there, motionless, her skin as pale as freshly fallen snow. Her eyes, once full of life, were now tinted deep red, just like mine. The same cursed shade that now haunted me everywhere, like a death sentence. My legs gave out, and I collapsed beside her, devastated by the loss I could barely understand. I held her, screaming for help, but no one came. They knew. Everyone knew. The curse was already spreading, touching everything I loved. The pain was unbearable, but along with it came something new. A blazing anger that burned stronger than the fear. That wasn't a warning. It was a declaration of war. And I knew the Oni wasn't finished yet. The pain from losing her was a constant poison in my veins, but there was no time for mourning. I knew this was just the beginning. The mark on my forehead burned like a live ember, a cruel reminder that my life was bound to that curse. Every step I took in the village was followed by looks of fear and contempt. I no longer belonged there. As the days dragged on, the nightmares worsened. Every night I saw the Oni, his deep laughter echoing through the shadows as he claimed more lives. It was as if he fed on my suffering, growing stronger with each blow he dealt. There was no more doubt. I couldn't escape. The only way out was to face him, or be consumed once and for all. With trembling hands, I picked up an old sword that had belonged to my father. The blade was worn, but it was all I had. Before I left, I looked toward the forest in the distance. Dark, endless, hungry. I was going to the heart of that hell and tear the curse out by the roots, or die trying. The hunt was about to begin. I left the village behind, along with everything I knew. The cursed forest stretched out before me like a sleeping beast, waiting to devour yet another unwary soul. With the sword strapped to my back and the weight of the past on my shoulders, I took my first steps into the unknown, driven only by hatred and the will to survive. There was no turning back. As I went deeper, I realized the silence here was almost unbearable. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the constant presence of something hidden, always watching. The dense atmosphere made each breath heavier and my mind waver. I felt chills as I passed trees with deep claw marks, as if something was intentionally leaving tracks. I walked for hours until I spotted an ancient ruin, the forgotten temple of the old gods. The weathered stones still exuded a cold energy, as if they held secrets that should never be revealed. I knew that the answer to the curse that haunted me was there, or perhaps my end. I was just a few steps from the temple entrance when I felt an intense cold cut through the air, as if the forest itself was warning me to turn back. But there was no more room for hesitation. With the sword firmly in my hand, I stepped toward the stone door, already worn by time and by forgetfulness. That's when I heard a hoarse, deep voice from the shadows. "You carry the mark, but you're not lost yet." I quickly turned, my heart racing, and saw a hooded figure emerge from the darkness. His eyes were two pale flames, burning with ancient knowledge. He held a staff adorned with symbols I didn't recognize, but that seemed to pulse with power. "I am the guardian of the portal, and your final warning." He explained that I had been chosen by the curse, and that facing it meant more than just a battle. It was a pact of life and death. With each word, my determination mixed with the deepest fear I'd ever felt. I knew I couldn't win alone, but retreating would mean condemning more innocents. The choice had already been made, even before I got here. The Guardian's words still echoed in my mind. Only blood can summon him, and only blood can seal him. That was the price of the ancient ritual, a personal sacrifice to draw the Oni out and face his fury directly. With no other choice, I took the ritual dagger he handed me, a heavy object with strange carvings that seemed to pulse in my hands. My fate was sealed. With a firm motion, I drew ancient symbols on my skin, letting the blood flow as an inevitable offering. The pain was sharp, but it brought a bitter clarity, as if the forest recognized the sacrifice and accepted me as part of it. The ground around me seemed to twist, and the cold wind carried a distant whisper. He was coming. Then, something inside the temple lit up with a weak and threatening glow. I felt an overwhelming presence drawing near. I was no longer in the world of the living, but I wasn't dead either. I was at the threshold between existence and oblivion, where men become legends and legends become eternal curses. The battle was about to begin, and there was no turning back. He would find me, and I would be ready. The forest fell silent in a way I had never felt before. Even the wind seemed frozen in the air, as if waiting for the inevitable to unfold. I stood in the center of the ruined temple, the sword in one hand, and my heart pounding like a war drum. Then, the silence was broken. Heavy footsteps echoed like distant thunder, accompanied by a monstrous breath. He emerged from the shadows, colossal and imposing. His scarlet eyes burned like eternal embers, carrying an ancient hatred. His red skin seemed made of hot metal, with deep scars that told tales of ancient battles. Each of his steps made the ground tremble, as if the very earth acknowledged his dominion. "You called me, and now you must pay the price," he growled, with a voice that seemed to crack the stones around me. The blade in my hand trembled as much as I did. I knew there was no guaranteed victory, only the certainty that this was my only chance. He charged like a living storm, delivering a powerful blow that nearly tore me in half. I rolled to the side, struggling to breathe. The battle had begun, and in that moment, only one of us would walk away alive. The battle was a nightmare made real. Each blow from the Oni was like an avalanche of pure destruction. His fury seemed limitless, and the entire forest trembled under the impact of our fight. My sword, old and worn, clashed against his claws like a fragile defense against an inevitable fate. I was losing, slowly being swallowed by the darkness. I attacked with everything I had, but it was like trying to cut through a mountain. The Oni was relentless, a force that knew no fatigue or mercy. Then I realized, this fight was never about winning. The burning mark on my forehead began to pulse as if it recognized the truth I had taken so long to understand. I couldn't defeat him, but maybe I could imprison him. With the last bit of strength I had, I focused on the one thing he would never expect: sacrifice. If my soul was marked, it could be the anchor that would bind him forever. With a deafening scream, I drove my sword into my own chest, feeling the searing heat consume everything around me. The temple shook as the Oni roared in hatred and despair. I was dragging him with me into oblivion. The pain was still there, alive and unbearable. But I didn't feel the sword piercing my chest. My breathing was heavy, and my eyes struggled to adjust to the oppressive darkness around me. I was kneeling on the cold, damp floor of the temple, without any wounds. The sword was still in my hand, worn but intact. The battle, had it really happened? My mind twisted as I replayed every moment of the confrontation. The fight, the sacrifice. It all seemed as real as the ground beneath my knees. But the more I thought, the more fragments slipped away like smoke in the wind. The Oni. His words still echoed deep and threatening. You'll never leave here. I live inside you. I touched the burning mark on my forehead, feeling its pulse, like a dark heart beating out of place. Then I realized the suffocating truth. None of it happened outside my mind. The battle, the ritual, even the sacrifice. It was all part of a twisted game created by the Oni to break me. The curse was never about killing him. It was about trapping me. I never left that temple, and I never would. He won. Sometimes, the greatest enemies aren't in the shadows, but in the depths of our own minds. The curse of the Scarlet Eyes was never about monsters or ancient spirits. It was about how we face our darkest fears. How many times have you fought something that seemed impossible to overcome? Maybe that battle is still happening, silently, insidiously, waiting for the right moment to take control. Now I ask you, how far would you go to free yourself? Maybe this story has ended, but fear, it never ends. If you believe these stories should continue to be told, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support keeps the legends alive. And who knows, it might just keep away whatever is watching in the dark.